Nuclear is a fine source of energy, but many people do not think it's the case. What's wrong with it? What's right with it? What's the future? Where's it going? And why on earth is it taking so long? These and many more questions. Yes, we will be talking about small modular reactors and the big ones too. I'm Brian. Welcome to Futuraza. So I am joined today, as I so many times have been, by my good friend Mark from the Tesla Life. Yeah, I add an extra "the" because you're now part of the cinematic universe,
Wow.
which is
I didn't even
it's
know that.
well, The Shawshank Redemption is in that cinematic universe, as is there's a lot of great movies in there.
Man,
The
I'm
Hunger
glad to
Games,
be part of the new crowd. That's
it's very exciting. All documentaries take place in the same universe. That's pretty interesting. Uh, in theory, not so much those ones about ancient aliens and all that, but I
yeah.
don't call those documentaries. I call those garbage. Apologies to my alien brethren. We will meet again soon. So, over the last week, I've had a chance to spend a couple days with a coal plant engineer. I've had a chance to spend a couple days with a nuclear plant engineer. I asked both of them in this order, would you be interested in being in a video? To which the answer was no. I said, would you be willing to be in a video? To which the answer was no. To which I said, would you be willing to sit off camera while I perform a video about what I have learned while you listen and then correct me so I can make adjustments? And they said no. And, and well, part of it is, like any company, anyone who's worked for a Fortune 500 company knows when the media asks you to go on camera, you say, talk to the media department. It's just good practice. And especially with the nuclear plant, he was especially cautious about sharing information at all. So the questions he was willing to answer for me were things that had nothing to do with his plant or his operations or what they do and how they work, but nuclear generally. He has extensive experience. He is a high level engineer. I so we have some answers. But
Besides, what's his favorite color?
blue. No. So first question I would have for you, Mark, is how do you feel about nuclear? Good, bad, indifferent?
I would have to say I feel pretty good about nuclear, based on the history that nuclear's had in my country and my province. It seems that if you monitor and you maintain the reactors, that they work kind of well. Again, no emissions. You do have radioactive material at the end of the spent fuel rods, but besides that, you get a pretty safe and certainly a reliable amount of electricity that come out of those plants. It's certainly done well here in Canada for the last 50 plus years.
In the US, there is still something like 19% of power is generated by nuclear power. But there are a lot of misconceptions about it on both sides. One is, of course, the safety concern is blown way out of proportion. Uh, but I don't see that as the complicating factor. The people I talk to, the people I know, the people their complaint is not about safety. It's not that they don't want one in their neighborhood or their backyard. They don't generally put them in people's backyards. If you were to build a new one today, you would put it somewhere remote on purpose. But the concern is they take a long time to build and they're expensive.
Yeah.
The myth that when the nuclear age dawned, they kept saying it will be so cheap, it won't be worth it to even put a meter on. And that, of course, never came true. And it's increasingly clear it can't come true. Cost is absolutely an issue. Um,
As a matter of fact, Brian, there's been some stats showing the decreasing price of solar wind compared to the increasing costs of nuclear. So the charge per kilowatt just keeps going up when it comes to nuclear. But with solar and wind, it has been on a steady downturn.
I had a chance to talk separately a month or two ago to a representative who was at one of these EV events from the power utility in Portland. And I asked him, if all these new forms of generation are cheaper and cheaper, why does power rates keep going up? And he had some great answers. He said transformers cost more than ever. The lines are aging and need to be replaced. The workers who work on all of these have had substantial raises. Labor costs more than it used to. With inflation, supplies, the materials cost more than they used to. So there are a lot of factors beyond what the actual generation is. What he said is if we didn't take these steps to provide lower power generation costs, then power would cost even more today.
Mm.
And that all of those individual components make sense. Things just cost more than they did 10 years ago. So, have you heard any things about, let's start by getting large nuclear out of the way. Large nuclear power plants are pretty fantastic. They output a ton of juice consistently, fairly consistently for long periods of time. The problem with large nuclear is there is nothing permitted currently. There's nothing under construction. There is nothing that has reached the point where they are ready to break ground. And they take 10 at least, usually 20 years, if they ever come online at all. That's a problem.
Yeah.
How do you mitigate that? There's money still being offered through things like the IRA for nuclear power development. It's just a very risky investment unless it is 100% government backed, and there is government backing available, where if the power plant comes online, you get paid, and if the power plant doesn't, you still get paid. That to me seems like the wrong incentive, but even with that incentive, they're not building them. So let's talk about small modular reactors. I know you know quite a bit about nuclear generally from before. I know you've been doing some recent research. What'd you find?
I find a bit of a mixed bag. I went back in the news articles with searches and watched a few videos off of YouTube as well, with them talking about SMR. And what I discovered is that there are a number of players that are trying to come up with a solution for these small reactors that are cheaper to make, able to come online at a faster clip, and of course, still have the regulatory hurdles to cross as well. But many different governments and countries are trying to get this online. And there's a bit of a mixed bag in success. For example, some of the larger, well known companies out there, such as Rolls-Royce in England, have been trying to do this now for the better part of a decade. China has been trying to produce, even with the power of the state behind it, they're trying to produce some small modular reactors as well. And they don't have anything that's coming online until 2026. So they've been pushing. They have a small test out there, but they're trying to put it at scale to actually now provide power to, roughly 500,000 homes. So they're having difficulty. Rolls-Royce in England had an issue where they're all of a sudden are not cost effective anymore from the plans that they had for over 8 years now, as they've been in this development cycle. The US has a number of private companies that are trying to get online with an SMR. Canada even has their own couple of groups that have been working on the problem yet. But at this point today, none of them have really cracked the nut yet. There are many that are saying they're 18 months away, they're 2 years away, but there seems to be a problem that no one has gotten over the hump yet.
So I'm going to take a pause right here and say, this is an area that Mark and I have researched a bit. We are not experts. If you are an expert and would like to come back and have us discuss this in greater depth with your expertise, you are welcome to reach out to me on this channel, and we can have that conversation, because I'm not taking a position, pro or anti. I'm just trying to share the facts as I see them in terms of the reality. And part of that's going to be poking some holes in popular theories, but part of it's going to be poking holes in some of the negative, the downsides that have been proposed as well. The first problem I have is the whole notion of an exclusion zone. I don't remember who it was. Somebody recently said, you have to have a 17-mile exclusion zone around a nuclear power plant. And I mentioned that to my friend, and he said, I don't know what you're talking about. That is not a thing. So I'm going to share with you a picture of the Palo Verde power plant in Phoenix. This is a fantastic facility. They've got 3 big old generators, 1, 2, and the other one is over here somewhere. There, 3. These output an absolute like 1.5 terawatts or something like that. It is, each one of these could provide literally one entire medium-sized city or a single server rack at Giga Texas. So how big do you think the exclusion zone is here? Let's zoom out. By the way, here's the switch yard. This is all you need to output power that of 3 times what Tesla needs to input, which suggests their switch yard might be adequate. So here we are, we're zoomed out. This is the power plant. And these are some ponds and neighbors. They are that close. These are real houses where people live. They're that close.
Yeah.
I'm no cartographer, but that ain't 17 miles. And actually, we can drop a pin and find out how close that is. Let's go like that. Measure distance. From here to, should probably have scrolled a little better. Oh, for crying out loud. But you can see this is a half a mile right here. That's a half a mile. Right,
yeah, so you're under a mile.
You're under a mile away. And we could drag that further. Boy, we are making one big square here. So you are 2 miles from the action. It is very close. And if you go onto the map and look up here, there's a realtor up here. There's a ranch. I mean, that is not a substantial exclusion zone. So that myth, I think, needs to be disposed of. On the flip side of that, what was explained to me, and I should point out that because my friend works at a large nuclear reactor, the basis of his information is based on that. He said that when he looked into it, there were 2 test small modular reactors being built in the U.S. Both of them are at military bases, because whether your reactor is very small or very large, you need the same amount of security. You need the same security personnel. But if you put it at a military base, you're already in a secure site. So if you're going to put thousands of these around the country, you're going to need 1,000 copies of this security apparatus, of all these staff that the NRC will require you. NRC? Maybe. Will require you to have. It is not optional. I mean, could that even work? Would that even be a workable solution at that point?
It becomes questionable, because if you need the same type of security at a smaller site, and the idea, of course, is to have more of these smaller sites, then that pushes up the cost exponentially for the number of sites that are going to be around a city or in a city or on the outskirts of a city. That becomes questionable. That's part of the reason that the large nuclear reactor gives them the ability to protect one site that powers an entire or almost an entire city.
Exactly. And there's The idea that they would be in a city is still not realistic. You'd still want to be out of the city, but places that look like what we just showed on the map exist throughout much of the country. There are places. Now, you could just put them at every military base and say, hey, let's start with every military base is going to power itself and export a little bit of power. That would get you a long way towards your goal. I don't know if that's reasonable or any of that. Another thing I've repeatedly seen is, look, the Navy has small reactors. They've been putting them in submarines for ages and ages. Doesn't translate. It is a very different machine. It uses a different kind of uranium. It's not, and even the capacity factor is different. A submarine runs at, 15 to 30% capacity, where a power plant runs at 100% capacity. It's a completely different beast. It doesn't translate, and we know that because a lot of navies have had nuclear reactors on subs for generations, and they've never made it into the power plant mix because of other problems. Now, did you by any chance come across things that said that these would be either easier to build or more reliable than other forms of power?
Easier to build when they start to come onto scale. So there is the talk of manufacturing these plants because, of course, they are much smaller. We're talking about a footprint of a 53-foot tractor trailer as the base part of this unit that I was seeing in California. So certainly, if you can mass produce them, you can get to a point where, of course, mass production brings down the cost of everything. So yes, in a sense, but comparing it to the other forms of electricity out there, they're not quite there yet because they're not actually mass producing them.
They definitely aren't. Now, we could say that a satellite has never been built cheaply before, but if you look at SpaceX, they've found a way to do it, and it is exactly this. It is an assembly line.
Yeah.
But a satellite, as reliable and robust as it needs to be, is a very simple device compared to a nuclear reactor. The SMR designs that my friend has looked at have over 100 different types of valves. That's not simple. And just understanding how to repair them would be potentially problematic. People say, well, these are set it and forget it reactors. That's not a thing.
Yeah,
Even the
not yet.
large reactors. No, even the large reactors where they say, look, we're going to put it online. It's going to run for 50 years. Well, obviously it doesn't run for 50 years. You have to replace the fuel rods at some point. But even then, the systems trip. You will have to reset and do maintenance on them periodically. If you go 6 months in between resets, that's very good. If you go, and when a reactor is new, it can trip much more often, every few days, every few weeks. These are not set it and forget it machines. There's a lot. It is a complicated science. It's a complicated machine. The trade-off is when it produces tremendous amounts of energy at a fairly reasonable price. Not the cheapest, but pretty good. So yeah, they're very complicated and they're not yet cheap. The promise we've seen for decades and decades is that these will be cheaper. But as each passing decade goes, they're not. And like you were saying with Rolls-Royce, these cost overruns are eye-watering. And so, well, we can still make it up in volume. Can you? Can you, though? Was there anything else you found that you wanted to share?
One other thing was that Westinghouse, which of course is synonymous with nuclear power plants because they have made them and continue to do so, they're also looking at SMRs to introduce an extra flavor of what they have to offer. And they are currently using some of the same processes into their small nuclear modular reactor that they use in the big plants. And they're hoping that they're able to streamline things and make it more cost effective because of their experience with the big plants. But again, they haven't got to the point yet where they're demonstrating this in an actual running unit. They have lots of computer models and they have lots of specs on what this will be. But again, as said before, no one's really gotten over the hump yet.
Yes, I would agree with all that. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying in the last 80 years, it's never been done. 80? Yeah.
Yeah, about that.
Wow. Where's the time go? And then, yeah, it can happen. I've also seen people argue, well, if it just had financial support from the government, it's had financial support from the government for 80 years, all 80 of the years. That support continues today. My fear is that there are too many profiteers in the pipeline eager to steal, to enrich themselves rather than the uranium. And that's problematic, obviously. So, then, of course, the last thing I'm just going to briefly touch on, because we've already been going for quite a while and we need to hear from the experts. Yes, for real, you folks at home, is I've heard a lot of people say thorium. That's the answer, thorium. Thorium hasn't made it out of the lab. It's intensely corrosive and it destroys every machine that you put it in. And you can use it in the lab. You can generate power. You can't let it out of the lab because it just doesn't, it lacks the sufficient level of robustness that you would require for something in an actual practical application. We want hassle free. We need hassle free. And this is the opposite. Many countries are experimenting with it. They have yet to solve it. And I've seen people say, well, it's just it's a simple salt reactor. It's like, no, there's a reason they haven't made it out of the lab. Uh, so on that, I guess we could say, I don't have anything else. Did you?
I would just like to say that the jury's out. We are at a point where we've got many working on it, many countries, many companies in cooperation trying to crack this nut. But until we start seeing some real ones come online and the power output is actually published and white papered, we're really at a point where we don't know.
And it's not one government holding it back. It's not one hemisphere holding it back. It's the logic, it's the reality on the ground. Even if you have a totalitarian state with quasi infinite funding, they still can't leave the lab. Nuclear power, as good as it is, ends up being expensive. And I've seen too many people suggesting we stop working on renewables, which deploy very quickly and cheaply, because nuclear could be better. Well, solar plus battery doesn't work because if you look at the math, you can come up with some way to say it needs to be a little bit better. But then they throw out nuclear already. They throw out nuclear saying in the future it will do this. Well, if we're talking about the future, I got to talk about batteries that haven't been built yet, batteries that won't exist for 20 years. And at that point, all bets are off.
I'm not adverse to working on nuclear and having groups and companies and people looking for solutions. I think we need all the solutions we can get. So spreading it out amongst many different pieces is probably the best solution for us now until we can land upon something that works for the majority of us.
And if you look at the US government funding, but also international funding, it appears clear to me that all of the above is the solution they're working on. It's just that wind and solar happens to come online very quickly. If you contract a solar farm and you run out of money halfway through, what you get is 50% of your power production. If you commission a nuclear power plant and get 99.99% done, what you get is nothing. You cannot have a partial nuclear plant. I mean, you could cancel additional reactors, but those are stretch goals. Where with a solar farm, if you get 50 panels up and stop, it still produces power. That's a difficult reality to circumvent. That's why there's so much private investment in these forms of power that can come online in months, if not a couple of years, versus 10 to 20, if ever. In the comments, you guys, don't be mad. We're not saying nuclear is is the golden goose, nor the, you know, the worst thing ever. We're just trying to share some perspective. I've had some great conversations with these engineers. They've shared a lot of valuable information, but they won't go on camera. And I know some of you out there are thinking, I wish Brian wouldn't go on camera, but it's too late. You're already here. So what did we miss? What did we misunderstand? Leave it in the comments below. Do me a favor if you wouldn't mind. Head on over to the Tesla Life. They do a weekly podcast. It is a whole lot of fun. I have unfortunately fallen weeks behind because my road travel is slowly killing me. But I will be home probably by the time this runs. So, yeah, everybody else, like, subscribe, do the usual, smack thumbs, drop me a buck or two on Patreon if you wouldn't mind, because I am just wanting to continue doing this and it's very hard. Anyway, this is my full-time job. I need your support. So, yeah, everybody else, stay tuned, stay juicy, and I cannot wait to hear from you clever robots outside the exclusion zone.